of dollars to try to deal with this. So when the Colonial Pipeline, the biggest fuel pipeline in the United States of America, falls to a ransomware attack, that is a very powerful signal that things have not gone well in our response to this. And partly, it's the national cybersecurity establishment that needs to step up its game. And partly, it's the corporate community that has been caught with its figurative trousers down, having said for years, don't worry, we've got this, don't regulate us. So we're going forward in that context with a bill that does really three major things. One is it takes the existing legal powers of the racketeering statute, of the money laundering statute, and of the forfeiture statute, and brings them to bear on cyber criminals. The second thing it does is it goes after the scourge, the plague of botnets on the internet. Senator Graham and I have had hearings in which he's inquired of witnesses what the damn use is of a botnet.
What's the upside of a botnet?
And there is no upside to a botnet. It's a weed in the internet garden. And yet there are limits on what we can do to strip botnets off of the internet. Well, this addresses those botnet authorities, and it also addresses the problem of rent-a-bot, where the malign actor creates a botnet, and instead of doing evil things over its botnet itself, it rents it out to other people. So we need to make sure we stop that behavior. And the last thing we do is create enhanced penalties for attacks on our critical infrastructure, such as the Colonial Pipeline. So I will leave it there and just express my gratitude to my three Senate Judiciary colleagues who have come together to do this. And I think if there ever was a time to get this done, this is it. We're going to work very hard to get it past. Senator Graham.
Thank you. So Sheldon has been like a dog on a bone with this thing, and he was right before it was cool. So in July 2015, we did a hearing in Judiciary called Cybercrime, Modernizing Our Legal Framework for the Information Age. In 2016, we did a hearing in May, Ransomware, Understanding the Threat and Exploring Solutions.
What year again was that?
2016.
Yeah, how about that?
August of 2018. Cyber threats to our nation's critical infrastructure. So two things strike me. Nobody is paying attention to us. We've had 3 hearings about what has been unfolding in front of us. And to Senator Whitehouse's credit, and Senator Blumenthal, who was a prosecutor, he has been on this, and I am a good partner in the sense that I understand the problem better because of these 2 gentlemen, and deterrence has been lost. How could the single source of gasoline for the East Coast and many parts of the East Coast be shut down in 2021? Clearly, the private sector has not done its job, and I would argue if you're a shareholder of the Colonial Pipeline, you should be really pissed. How could this happen? And if the private sector needs help from the government, I think we're willing to make sure that happens. So I'll end with this. I asked the Secretary of Defense today, about 15 minutes ago, does the Department of Defense have a definition as to what would constitute a cyber attack against the United States? And there was deaf silence. The answer is no. Now, I'm not blaming General Austin, Secretary Austin. In 2021, the Department of Defense doesn't have a definition of what a cyber attack against America would be, constitute, and how to respond. In 2021, we had the largest pipeline supplying gas to the East Coast shut down, and a major food processing plant shut down from Russian-speaking cyber terrorists. So this law goes after the criminal syndicates, but we also have to go after the host countries. I find it impossible to believe that these Russian-speaking terrorists, cyber terrorists, operating in the sphere of influence of Russia that the Russians don't know about it and they're not in on it.
You don't think that when you can't criticize Putin in Russia without getting a dose of Novichok, they are somehow giving license to criminals who are acting in their jurisdiction? Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. The Russians do know about it. A cyber criminal network of this magnitude and profitability couldn't exist in Russia without Vladimir Putin knowing about it. And before we focus on this bill, I just want to recall a hearing where our very good common friend John McCain and I had an exchange on exactly this topic. It was years ago. We have no policy in the United States of America as to what constitutes an act of war on this country in the cyber domain.
Yes, still don't.
We have no policy now. We didn't under President Obama. We didn't under President Trump. We need one under President Biden. And we're here in part because, as Senator Whitehouse has said so eloquently, the private sector has resisted responsibility for years out of an effort to avoid the embarrassment, frankly, and disclosure of weaknesses in their systems, the indefensibility of their information, and the potential embarrassment of succumbing to an attack. They have resisted this responsibility. But now there is no boundary. The internet is seamless. And when there is an invasion of Colonial, when it's taken down, we are all at risk. We're talking here about a national security crisis. Ransomware is not just about an attack on a private company. It is an attack on school systems, on hospitals, on utilities that are vital to our national security. And this bill is really, the way to think of this bill is as an infrastructure bill, because we're protecting infrastructure and we're taking down infrastructure that belongs to the cyber criminals and stopping the safe harbors, because obviously these cyber criminals are using a form of currency that can be so easily laundered. So we're taking down the infrastructure that enables that money laundering, the renting of malware that is part of that infrastructure, and the commissioning of agents to engage in this ransomware. So prosecutors need these tools to take down botnets. And I will just close by saying what we're seeing here is it's not just a weed. It's an invasive species. It's comparable to the invasive species that needs to be stopped in your garden before it takes over everything in that garden. And here, the garden will succumb to that invasive species if we don't stop it.
Questions?
Question for Senator Graham. Despite your tweet yesterday, I just wanted to know, do you trust that Biden was able to pressure Putin directly about cyber attacks? And do you have any confidence that Putin will make any sort of change in behavior after his meeting with President Biden yesterday?
Well, I think what we're doing today would give President Biden more tools to work with. So the answer is, I don't think Putin's going to stop until the pain is real. I think the likelihood of criminal enterprises this large operating in Russia without his knowledge is zero. And the offensive capability of the United States is large. And what we're trying to do is get the Department of Defense and our intelligence community to give us some reasonable definition of what a cyber attack would look like and how to appropriately respond. The host country to these criminal enterprises, and Iran is pretty much easier because the Revolutionary Guard of Iran is part of the government. North Korea does this all the time. So the question for us is, when North Korea does what they're doing in the cyber world, what would constitute attack, how to respond? I think that's one thing. But from the criminal enterprise point of view, we've got to up the cost of doing business here. These people are making probably billions of dollars and the penalties are inadequate to the crime. So that's what we're here today to deal with, is to give prosecutors more tools to shut down botnets and to increase the cost of doing business by increasing criminal penalties. The host nation behavior, that's more problematic, but we need to deal with it.
Senator, I was going to just ask you sort of your prospects on passing this or anything else, whether it be infrastructure or something to target ransomware. Particularly, there's no question that ransomware is an issue. We've seen it's increasing by 93% a week, every week for the last 12 months. But your prospects for actually getting 60 votes?
Well, we have an infrastructure bill that I think 11 Republicans have announced they're going to co-sponsor, so that, if we're agreed, gets us over 60. And you can bet that if a big bipartisan infrastructure bill is going forward, there are going to be a lot of other bipartisan measures that have come out of committee that people are going to want to add onto that infrastructure framework. And I think Senator Blumenthal used the magic word when he called this an infrastructure bill.
And there's no need for pay for. No pay for necessary. In fact, it's a revenue producer.
That's right. Even if you get 11 Republicans, can you get 50 Democrats to agree?
I think we're good at this point now that the two-lane solution, that's not the university, that's the two, has been, I think, put forward.
Can you expand a little bit on what Senator Graham was talking about on the foreign side of this? It seems like there's kind of another piece that needs to happen here, right? You can go after domestic bad actors, you can increase criminal penalties here, but if the bad guys are sitting in Moscow or Tehran or wherever else, how do you take this and go after the bad guys who are overseas?
Well, if you go back to the Obama administration, we were getting hacked to pieces by China, stealing intellectual property in order to prop up their industries without paying licensing fees to ours. And after considerable deliberation, then Attorney General Holder finally got around to charging several members of the Chinese military with criminal offenses. And that fired a very loud shot across the bows, and I think substantially reduced that hacking effort and put much higher a penalty on it. So this provides more tools for law enforcement to provide that same kind of international shot across the bows of the host country by bringing criminal cases against those who are directly involved in the criminal offense. But there is more that needs to be done than criminal prosecution. It has to fit into an integrated foreign policy strategy of deterrence and punishment for misbehavior.
Yeah, I think the answer is very simply what Biden said to Putin. How would you feel if your pipelines were shut down? And I think Putin has to realize that tolerance for this kind of criminal activity goes both ways. And there is a reason, for example, that support for proxies has not meant, so far, knock on wood, that tactical nuclear weapons are supplied to terrorists. There are limits to what even Russia will do in supporting terrorist activity around the world. And those may be self-imposed restraints, but here what we need is some agreement, part of a broader agreement on cyber. You know, just as we have no policy of war, we have no real negotiations on cyber, and cyber is the new nuclear because it can have consequences that are comparable in how dire they may be.
Another question? Yes, sir. And we'll clear it out.
How can you guarantee, though, that private entities will be able to actually cooperate on this? That even if it does pass, you guys brought the factor of that embarrassment where some companies don't want to give in, even if they have been penetrated on stuff. How will you guys be able to communicate that with companies who are resistant?
So, we've been talking about a lot of things that apparently nobody's been paying attention to. We had 3 hearings on this topic over the last 5 years. And now we got a moment in time where you can't ignore it anymore. I now deem this infrastructure. I'm one of the 11 Republicans. I'm going to insist that we consider putting this piece of legislation in the infrastructure bill. So years ago, Senator Whitehouse came to me with an idea called Fort Cyber. If I'm a shareholder of Colonial Pipeline, we took a real beating, right? Did they do what the best business practices would dictate in protecting the pipeline from a widely known threat? So if you're a power company and you get knocked offline through some cyber attack and my refrigerator goes down, can I sue you for all the meat I lost? So I would urge the private sector that you've got to up your game, because here's what we proposed. We took critical infrastructure, broadly defined, and told the businesses in that space, if you will engage in the best business practices available to you and take this threat seriously, and you get hacked and you get shut down, you'll have legal immunity because you did everything within reason you could have done, and the carrot for you is no liability. That's what's missing. The business community resisted this idea. So to the business community, if you're listening out there, if you get hacked tomorrow and your product gets shut down, people are going to sue you. You should join with us to harden your infrastructure in a reasonable way, and the reward would be liability protection. If we don't do that, we're not doing the most we can in America to protect ourselves from what we know to be a wide and deep threat.
And you'll be sued not only by the family who loses meat in the refrigerator, you'll be sued by your shareholders.
Yeah.
And you'll be sued for punitive damages, and you will be sued by others who may suffer losses as a result of
An enterprising and legally talented attorney general might even find a cause of action
or a
against you.
former attorney general.
Thank you all very much. I'm sorry,
Thanks.
one more?
Senator, where are you on police reform at this point?
We're close.
Good answer.
Does close mean next week we hear something, sir?